Have you ever felt totally lost in a crowd? Or, looked up at some giant skyscraper and just wondered, why is that right here? Well, our cities are like these incredibly complex texts, just full of hidden meanings. And in this explainer, we're going to give you the tools to read them. So let's get into it. We're going to start with a really modern paradox. Right now, we are building cities that are designed to be, well, perfect. But as you'll see, that perfection often comes with a pretty big hidden cost. And it makes you wonder what we really want from our cities in the first place. Okay, so take a look at this. This is Songdo in South Korea. It's a city that was literally designed from scratch to be perfect. It's clean, it's sustainable, it's hyper-efficient. This is a place where all those annoying city problems like traffic jams or pollution, they've basically been engineered right out of existence. It's supposed to be the city of the future. But what's it actually like to live there? Well, listen to how this perfection actually works. Your garbage gets sucked away automatically, which, okay, that sounds amazing. But the lampposts, they're always watching you. This idea of a perfectly smooth, engineered life immediately slams into this really unsettling reality of constant total surveillance. And that right there is what we call the smart city paradox. It's all laid out on this slide. On the one hand, you've got this incredible promise of a green, efficient utopia. But on the other, for a lot of people who actually live there, the reality is a place that's ridiculously expensive, socially kind of cold and isolating, and where you feel like you're always being watched. This isn't even a new problem. To really get it, we need to look at how cities have always shaped who we are. So how exactly does the city get inside our heads? This was a question that early sociologists were totally fascinated by. They really wanted to know, how does living in a city fundamentally change us as people? And here's the core idea. You really can't separate the city from the mind. The streets, the buildings, the endless crowds, all of it leaves a pretty deep imprint on our consciousness. So if you want to understand the city, you first have to understand what it's doing to the people who live inside it. A sociologist named Ferdinand Tönnies, he spotted this fundamental shift. He basically said that we moved from something called Gemeinschaft, the deep, personal, lifelong bonds you'd find in a small village, to Gesellschaft, which is all about the impersonal, transactional relationships you have in a big city. Just think about buying a coffee from a barista. It's quick, it's efficient, but it's an exchange, right? It's not a deep, lasting bond. And building on that, another thinker, George Simmel, he zeroed in on this exact struggle. How does any single person maintain their sense of self when they're faced with the crushing, overwhelming force of a giant metropolis? How do you not just get completely lost in the crowd? Simmel's answer to that question was what he called the blasé attitude. And wow, this is such a key insight. When you see someone on the subway just staring into space with their headphones on, ignoring absolutely everything around them, it's not because they're rude or a bad person. It's a survival mechanism. It's a mental shield you put up to protect yourself from the absolute sensory overload of city life. And this attitude doesn't just come from nowhere. It develops for some really specific reasons. You've got the constant sensory bombardment, the fact that everything runs on a money economy, the nonstop need for punctuality and calculation, and just the sheer crush of people everywhere. To survive all that, you develop what's called an urban reserve. You tune things out. You kind of have to, just to keep your sanity. Okay, so we've looked at what's going on inside an individual's mind. Now let's zoom out and look at the city as a whole. Because a group of sociologists started to see cities not as just chaotic messes, but as these complex, living organisms with their own predictable rules. Back in the early 20th century, a group of sociologists in Chicago had this really radical idea. What if a city isn't just a random pile of buildings and people? What if it's a living ecosystem, kind of like a forest? They called this whole idea urban ecology, and they were convinced that just like in nature, cities followed these predictable patterns of growth and change. And they saw this urban growth happening in basically a three-stage process. First, you got competition. Different groups are all fighting for the best locations. This leads to invasion and succession. Think of it like a new species moving into a habitat. One group moves in and another moves out. And the end result of all this is segregation. The city basically organizes itself into these distinct zones, almost like the rings of a tree. You get a business district in the middle, a ring of working-class homes, and then the suburbs spreading way out to the horizon. But you have to ask, does this idea of a natural order still really hold up today?
I mean, the sheer scale of modern urbanization, especially in the global south, is just staggering. Look at this chart. We're talking about 2 billion more people moving into cities in just a single generation. This kind of explosive, often chaotic growth made a lot of thinkers start to question if there was anything natural about it at all.
Which brings us to our final and maybe most critical perspective. What if the city isn't a natural living organism at all? What if it's a battleground, a landscape that is actively and intentionally shaped by power, by money, and by conflict? This is where we get to the work of thinkers like David Harvey. They looked at our cities and just said, this is no accident. They argued that the shape of our cities is the direct result of economic and political struggles. The city essentially becomes a kind of seesaw. The constant flow of money, of capital looking for profit, lifts some areas way up, while at the very same time it pushes others down. And the really crucial concept here is uneven development. Capital, or money, gets poured into certain areas to create these hyper-developed, wealthy zones. But that same process simultaneously drains resources from other areas, creating neglect and poverty. The key thing to get is that these two things aren't separate. They are two sides of the exact same coin. I mean, just look at Dubai's Palm Islands. This is maybe the most staggering example of uneven development you could possibly find. Billions upon billions of dollars poured into creating an artificial paradise for the global elite. It's a monument to where capital wants to go. And here is the other side of that coin. This is a massive slum on the outskirts of Mexico City. So how are these two places, thousands of miles apart, connected? Well, the theory of uneven development argues that the same global economic system that concentrates unimaginable wealth in places like Dubai is the same one that extracts resources and labor from places like this, creating these landscapes of extreme poverty. One really can't exist without the other. And the writer Mike Davis, in his incredible study of Los Angeles, he took this idea even further. He showed how cities are now being physically hardened to enforce this separation. He said public space is being turned into these privately controlled corridors, all designed to keep the rich and the poor as far apart as possible. And this battle, it's fought with concrete and steel. Just look at some of these tactics. Those barrel-shaped benches that are impossible to sleep on, the walled-off gated communities. This is what's called defensive architecture. And I promise you, once you start looking for it, you will see it absolutely everywhere. It's a way of using urban design itself as a weapon to control who belongs in public space and who doesn't. So, where does all this leave us? We've explored 3 really different ways of trying to understand the city. Now, let's bring it all together and see how these lenses can help us read our own environment. We've gone on quite a journey, right? We started by seeing the city dwellers' blasé attitude as this necessary psychological shield. Then we saw the city as a kind of self-sorting ecosystem. And finally, we viewed it as a battleground shaped by money and power. These aren't just abstract theories. Each one is like a different map you can use to make sense of the territory you walk through every single day. So the next time you walk outside, I want you to look around. Look at the architecture, look at the flow of people, look at the design of a simple public bench. You now have the tools to see the stories that are hidden in plain sight. So the real question is, what will you discover? Your city is a text. How are you going to read it now?